like 4 seconds. So if the Panopto doesn't work, I don't know what to tell you. Looks like it's working fine. All right. So let's talk about evolution. You guys have to know all the names, all the dates, all the tools, everything. If you get into an attitude of, that's probably not very important, you're wrong. It's going to be on the test. Whatever you think isn't important is going to be on the test. Whatever you think is important, also on the test. There's a massive, massive, massive amount of material that you have to memorize, right? It's not all going to be on there, but there's absolutely no way to predict which one's going to be on there, right? He may ask you, what type of tools did Homo erectus use, and when did it live, right? But if you don't have that entire list memorized, he could ask Australopithecus Afarensis, right? He could ask any random one, any date, any tool. Did it have an example like Lucy or Turkana Boy or any of those, right? So you have to know all this stuff. So the study tip is to develop your own ways of memorization. So my study tip last time was to make essentially a big chart on one page, right? It worked great for me. It may not work for you. You'd have to probably try it to find out. So I would recommend trying it, but figure out what works for you. Are you a flashcards person? Are you a mnemonics person? Do you like to make up a little story that tells you how each species gave way to the next and at what time? You know, whatever works for you, but you have to know so much material, right? So A, find a way to make it work for you so that you can remember it very best. But B, start now, right? Don't get into a habit of, you know, I'll wait a few days and I'll see what happens, right? And when it's closer to the test, it'll be fresher, right? But then you won't have the time, okay? I promise you, right? It's like when we did the citric acid cycle, right? If the night before you sat down and drew it out a couple times, how sure are you that you would be able to do it exactly right with every single piece there the next day? It's not great odds, right? And that's the thing, you have to have every piece there because he could ask you just one single part of the whole thing. So find a way to make this work for you and start now, okay? Questions before we get started? All right. So these are all the names and dates you have to know. There are more species than this, obviously. These are the ones that Dr. Messina and Utah State University decided were the most important for you to know for this class. Why? I have no idea. It's random information, in my opinion. But you still have to know it for the test, right? So even if you can't necessarily see why this is critical to your education, it is critical to a good grade in this class because it's critical to a good grade on the next test and the final, right? Final's comprehensive. So we're just going to start going through them and probably not spending massive amounts of time on any one unless there's an important concept associated with it because, again, it's just memorization. So pretty much for the rest of the semester, like I said before, my job is just to tell you what to memorize and what you can ignore, which is almost nothing. So, Ardipithecus ramidus, the first one on the list, about 4.5 million years ago. They were facultatively bipedal, meaning they could walk on two legs, but it was not their only method of transportation, right? Humans are obligately bipedal. We only walk on two limbs, right? Unless you're like trying to get up the stairs really fast. Other than that, always two legs, right? Ardipithecus ramidus. I don't know which time it spent more doing, but it could walk upright and on all fours easily. It still had this grasping toe. It's basically like a thumb on their feet, right? Not very good for bipedality, so that's another reason that they think they probably weren't obligately bipedal, because the thumbs on your toes aren't really good for walking upright. And I guess it's good to know, but you don't have to know the numbers. It had a pretty small brain, right? Because again, this is the first pre-human species on our list, if you want to look at it that way, right? So it's still pretty darn close to apes. It says more ape-like than the later Australopithecus, right? Does that make sense? Pretty small brain. So I would know 4.5 million years, obviously the name. Probably that they were facultatively bipedal and had the thumb on their foot. And a small brain, but I wouldn't memorize those numbers per se. Cool beans? Up next, Australopithecus Afarensis. I don't know what Afarensis means. I know Australopithecus means southern ape. I don't know where the rest of like Afarensis and Africanus, I could guess why it's called Africanus, but so they did not have the toe, the thumb toe, right? And by looking at their tracks and things like that, they were able to figure out they actually walked upright, obligately bipedal. Those are two vocab terms to know well. Facultatively, they switched back and forth between 2 and 4 legs. Obligately bipedal, only upright on 2 legs. Let's see. We're not sure if they made stone tools, so that's an important distinction to make. It's still kind of being investigated. I could see a test question along the lines of something like, well, because we know the first tools were from Homo ergaster, right? We'll get to that in a second. I could see a test question saying Homo ergaster is, the first pre-human species to have been shown using tools, but scientists think there may be an earlier species. Which is it? And it would be this one, right? So it's just important to know that we're not sure if they use stone tools.
Sorry, it's facultatively versus what?
Obligate.
Obligate.
Like obligatory.
Thank you.
Again, still brain to body size ratio, still pretty on the low end. They're still more ape-like, chimp-like in brain to body size ratio. Yeah, it's not on there, huh? 3, basically 4.5 to 4 is what I would put. Because again, you're not going to need to know like 4.4 to 5, because he's not going to have a question that's like 4.3 to 5, 4.2 to 5, right? It'll be like 4.4 to 5, well, maybe, yeah, versus, 1 to 2.7 or 2 to 2.3, right? So as long as you know it's 5 to 4.5 versus 4.5 to 4, 3 to 4, 2.5 to 3, 1.8 to 2, right? So just, you can probably estimate within a couple 100,000 years. So that's a good question though. Or did I circle the wrong one? No, we were looking at Afarensis, huh? That one is 3 to 4 million years ago. Isn't that the one we're looking at? Yeah. 3 to 4 million years ago. Yeah, that's probably the most important stuff. So if you're making a graph, a chart, however you want to call it, I would put Australopithecus afarensis, 3 to 4 million years ago, obligately bipedal, and then maybe in like a miscellaneous category, I would put made stone tools, question mark, low brain to body size ratio.
These all in Africa, so.
Yes. Up until some of the hominoid, so the Homo species, as far as I understand, they're all in Africa. And almost all sub-Saharan, but that's not super important. Other questions? I thought I saw, yeah.
Are you going to put your slides on Canvas?
Oh, did I not? I was in a big hurry. I can do it right now, if you guys want. In case anybody wants to follow along, it's mostly from class. This is how much work I put into making these.
Thanks.
Yep, it should go up any second now. Or it'll take its time. We have like some of the fastest internet in Utah, and it still sucks. Or so they tell us that it's the fastest.
The fastest is in Provo when they have
The Google Fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah, freaking BYU.
So,
Bunch of jerks. We're not as rich as BYU, in case you guys didn't know. Okay, so, I guess this is another category that I would have in my chart would be famous examples, right? And so not every single one's going to have a famous example. In fact, fewer of them have an example in that they don't, but I would know every single one. So for Australopithecus Afarensis, Lucy. That's just what they named the skeleton that they found. And it was the first that they found that they could say was distinctively Afarensis, right? So just one more thing to put in your chart if you're making one.
so the time frame of Afarensis is
3 to 4.
3 to 4.
Yeah. Afarensis, 3 to 4. So we have Anamensis. Other than the name and the date, that's all we talked about. So I would put it in your chart because you never know what he's going to ask about. But you do know he's not going to, if he does ask anything about Anamensis, it's only going to be name and date. Whereas Afarensis, he could ask about Lucy or time frame, did they make stone tools, yada yada. So still worth putting in there, but not worth killing yourself over. Other questions? I was getting stoked. This is the best part of biology 1610 and 20 combined. Okay, then we move on to the Paranthropus species, called so because para means to the side. They're essentially a side branch, right? They started to evolve off of the Australopithecus and become their own species, but they eventually went extinct and never speciated into anything else, right? So if you were to look at their phylogenetic tree, it would just cut off. Whereas the rest of the Australopithecus are eventually going to lead into the Homo and eventually all the way down to Homo sapiens, right? So called Paranthropus because they're a side species. So about 2.5 million years ago. The sagittal crest is important to note. They're the only prehuman species that we talk about that I know of that have that. It's because they had such massive jaw muscles, right? This is pretty much the entire side of their face is dedicated to jaw muscle, and so they needed somewhere to anchor it. That's the point of the sagittal crest. And again, still a pretty small brain to body size ratio, still very ape-like. So I would know name, date, that they had a sagittal crest, and potentially that they went extinct and never, carried on any further lineage.
So in the player's slide, there's like 3 different names for that one.
Oh yeah. I don't know if each one is a different. I would guess it means it's a different species. All 3 were around the same time period. All 3 went extinct and never carried on a lineage, and all 3 essentially have close enough of traits that they all just fall under this general category. So we just lump all 3 together. That is a good question. So you won't see like this kind of Paranthropus versus that kind of Paranthropus, right? It's just, you'll just have a question about them in general. So if I were making my chart, I would probably just put Paranthropus and know that that means all 3 species. Other questions? Is the roll still going around? Did it make it all the way to the back? Who didn't get the roll? Everybody got the roll? Okay, then never mind. No one acknowledged me, so I was like, I should get used to it. I've been doing this for 4 semesters. Okay, Australopithecus Africanus, the following species. 2.5 million years ago, they found tongue child. So again, this is a key example species that I would put in my example column. They found him, and because of his teeth, they were able to tell he was probably about 3 to 4 years old when he died. They think he was attacked or scavenged by an eagle, right? Because there was like a big crush spot in his head. This is an adult skull for an Australopithecus africanus. Pretty small brain volume still. They had a forward foramen magnum. You guys remember what that is?
Forward jaw.
No.
It's the hole that allows your spinal cord to connect.
Yeah, it's the hole from essentially your spine, so your spinal cord can go up into your skull, right? You don't really think about it, but your skull has a hole at the bottom so that it can attach. So that's called your foramen magnum, right? So about this area, more or less.
What type of measurements you see?
Cubic centimeters. It's the same as, it's a volume, and it's the same as, I'm trying to think what it's the same as.
Milliliter.
Milliliters, yeah. So cc's, milliliters, same thing. So again, the important date, 2 important dates, would be that it's from about 2.5 to 3 million years ago, right? And they found tongue child pretty much at the end of that. I definitely would know. I would put that maybe in my miscellaneous column, that they had a forward foramen magnum.
Is this the one that is, like they say, definitely was bipedal because of that? Or is it
That is what they say about that. They say because it has a more forward foramen magnum, that's what you see in bipedal species, right? Because if you have it towards the back, it's kind of an indication that they walk like this, right? Because their skull connects flat to their body, whereas our skull connects upright. So yeah, this was one of the evidences that they said this is almost definitely an upright bipedal species because the foramen magnum is almost straight down. And this is where we started to kind of see it moving forward, right? They started to notice as time went on, it got more and more upright. Other questions? Australopithecus sediba. The interesting thing to point out from this one, to put in your miscellaneous column, is that it's physically the most similar to the later Homo species than any other previous Australopithecine, right? That's really it, besides 1.8 to 2 million years ago. Nothing massively important after that. Questions? Then we get into the good stuff, the Homo species. So the important ones we note, because obviously there's more than just these 5. Homo habilis, ergaster, erectus, Neanderthalensis, and us, Homo sapiens. Homo habilis was still actually not fully bipedal. It still was facultative 2 to 2.5 million years ago. Homo ergaster, about 1.5 to 2 million years ago. Erectus, 0.5 million to 1 point, whatever you want to call it. Neanderthalensis was 0.04 or 40,000 years ago to 0.4 or 400,000 years ago. So if you think about it, 40,000 years ago really isn't that long ago, right? There's even overlap with us, the Homo sapiens. What does that mean? Gene flow. hybrids, right? They existed at the same time, they met fairly often, and they would hybridize, right? They would reproduce with each other. That's why most human beings on Earth, unless you can trace your lineage straight back to sub-Saharan Africa and nowhere else, you'll have Neanderthal DNA in you, right? I mean, it's 0.00 whatever percent, but you have it in there, right? Because there was cross breeding. I was going to say contamination. That's a terrible way to put that. Do you have a question?
Yes. So have they been able to actually find skeletons prove any of these facts, or have they only been able to find skulls of them? And if why so, why only the skulls?
Of all of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of skeletons.
So it's more than just the skull that we keep getting.
Yeah, Lucy, they found that. This is just Lucy's skeleton. They found more complete skeletons since. That might be the only skeleton picture I have. But yeah, they're not just finding skulls. They're finding entire bodies. They just, in this picture,
Okay.
it's just skulls. But yeah, we have skeletons for all of these species. Pretty much until you have a complete skeleton, you can't really say it's a different species. So until we had a complete Homo ergaster skeleton, we just thought they were Homo habilis. I think it's on the next slide. No. So Homo habilis was the first species that they could definitively say used tools, right? Habilis means handyman. They were the first ones to actually deliberately shape stones into tools, right? Not because even birds and monkeys use stones as tools, right? But they just like grab a rock, crack open a nut, right? Homo habilis was the first species ever to take a rock and deliberately shape it into something, an arrowhead, an axe, a hammer, whatever, right? Maybe tie it to a branch or something. They actually made tools out of them, okay? So that's definitely something I would put in my miscellaneous category. And that might be all the important info from this slide. There's more, obviously, but do you have questions up to here? No, okay. So I would know these numbers. Homo habilis, 650 to 800. Erectus, 900 to 1200. And then Homo sapiens, us, 1200 to 1400 cubic centimeter brain volume. So they actually watched brain volume increase from the earliest Homo species all the way to Homo sapiens. Now we know all the brain volumes for even Neanderthals and ergaster and all that, but these are the three that you need to know. Again, if you just know it's about 600 to 800, 900 to 1200, 1200 to 400, you're not going to get like Homo sapien brain volume is 1200.1, 1222, right? It'll just be, you just know the general ranges and can compare them against each other. Yeah?
So in the last slide you had Homo erectus and then Homo erectus, and same with the Neanderthal.
You're asking about this part here?
Yeah,
I actually don't know why he did that. This was just, that's how it was in his slides. I don't know if it was just saying that it like went from ergaster to erectus. I don't know why that's in there.
Well, he talked about how the sapiens and the Neanderthals, like, there's evidence of them interbreeding. So I don't know if that.
It could be that ergaster and erectus also had crossover, except their dates don't look like they match up, but you never know. You're not going to be tested on something like that, because I actually don't know
So just
why that's.
ergaster and erectus are separate.
Yeah, so this is a separate species from that.
In class, he said that it was kind of because people are debating about the names. Like, we're not totally solid. Some people call the Homo ergaster Homo erectus.
So he said it's not totally separate from each other.
It's not totally agreed upon, but that we should call it Homo ergaster. And then
All right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't expect like a test question on something like that. He's more going to ask you like, when did they live? What kind of tools did they use? That kind of stuff. Yeah. Then again, it'll be on the test and you guys will all email me and you'll say, You said in session, I said I didn't think you would. I make no guarantees, ever. All right. Yeah, so no brain volumes. Well enough that if you were given random numbers like 900 to 1200, you could tell me which species it's for. Or if it said Homo habilis, you could tell me 650 to 800. Or if it put them all, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapien, put them in order of increasing brain volume from least to greatest, you would put them in that order, right? Something along those lines. Oh, questions? Okay, more names to memorize. And this would probably go, I would have a tools column in my graph, just because there are so many, and I don't want to fill my miscellaneous square too much, so I would have a tools one. You're pretty much just going to use it for the Homo species, but still. Homo habilis used Oldowan tools. I just remember that as oldest are the Oldowan, right? Homo erectus used Aculean, or I don't know, Aculean, I don't remember how you say it. Aculation, who knows? Nobody knows. Neanderthals were Mousterian, and Homo sapiens were Aurignacian. I don't have any other clever ways to remember any of them except for Oldowan are old. But this is probably worth something like making up a mnemonic for, right? Because you may very well be asked, what type of tools did Homo erectus use, right? I should have picked a different one because I can't pronounce that one. What type of tools did Neanderthals use? And you'd have to know it was Mousterian tools, right? You won't be able to get by with just stone, right? I don't know exactly what makes each one different from the other. They obviously got more sophisticated over time. But other than that, you don't have to know like, oh, they used this technique, right? You just have to know which species used which type of tool. Sound good? Okay, so I would have a separate column for that. You don't have to, but your miscellaneous column will probably start to fill up pretty fast if you're jamming like 8 different things in there. Another famous example worth knowing, they weren't sure to put him in Homo erectus or Homo ergaster. Again, that's one of those that there was some gray area. They can't definitively say he was this species or that species, so maybe just put him in like both for famous example, or like quotation marks, or draw an arrow, just so that you know he could fit into either section. So they call him Turkana boy. They found his skeleton. He had died at about 10 to 12 years old. It was 1.6 million years ago. And the important distinction is he made a good transitional species because his brain was definitely big enough to say, this is not an ape, right? He may have even been capable of speech, definitely tool use, right? Stuff that's definitely beyond apes as we generally think of them, right? Humans ourselves, we're still apes, technically, but we like to think of ourselves as above that. So his brain was on, the high end for Homo ergaster, up at 900 cc's. But it wasn't quite big enough, that's still 300 cc's below a human. So yeah, I would know name, time they found him, obviously what species he may have belonged to, technically both. And yeah, I guess his brain volume, but obviously he is Homo erectus at 900. If he's Homo erectus, that makes sense, right? So you don't necessarily have to memorize that as a separate point. Just know he fit into the low end of the Homo erectus brain size. Questions? I keep asking. There's really not that much to ask. You guys have had a lot of questions, though, so that's good. You got to ask them. An important species that's not a species that's kind of weird. Homo georgicus, they called him that because they found him in Georgia, right? Not like on the east coast of the United States, but in Eurasia. They found a Homo erectus, but he was different enough that they thought maybe he's actually Homo georgicus, kind of his own separate thing, 1.5 million years ago. He was not an anatomically modern human or hominoid like the Turconaboy that we just looked at, right? I don't know if we talked about his brain size, but I would guess it's probably smaller. You can see he still has the very prominent brow ridge and the very like extended jaw that you don't see in humans, right? That really wide nasal septum and nasal cavity that's more ape-like. The weird British teeth that's more British. Yeah, that's definitely the important stuff to know, is that he's British. Homo georgicus or Homo erectus, they're not sure where to put him. So I would somehow show in my chart that he's kind of between the two. 1.5 million years ago, not considered anatomically modern.
Is that saying that Turconaboy is anatomically modern for people?
Yes. So, or maybe not. No. It's saying neither of them is anatomically modern. Good catch. Because Turconaboy was not considered an anatomically modern human. So, also, I don't know. That's a little unclear because when I read it, it sounded like he's not anatomically modern like the Turconaboy is, but you caught it. So neither of them are anatomically modern. Java man, I actually don't know which species he fit into. Does anybody remember? Was it Homo erectus? Is Beijing man and Java man the same thing?
Yeah.
Oh. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then I'm remembering wrong. So Java man, Beijing man, same guy.
Well, it's not the same guy, it's two different.
Same species, two examples of the same species. Found him in China, hence Beijing man, 0.7 or 700,000 years ago. One of the interesting things to note is that he looks a lot like an anatomically modern human, kind of looking at him head on. This is obviously a computer model. We don't have any of them with skin still on them. But then they turn sideways and you can see the big brow ridge, the jutting jaw, the not fully upright foramen magnum, the slouched posture. Well, we all have that because we work desk jobs. But before desk jobs, nobody looked like that. So again, still not fully an anatomically modern human. Yeah. Other questions? So, same species, different names because there were two dudes. I don't know where Java is, but that's where they found him. And Beijing is in China, if you didn't know that. Java's a coffee. It's also like a programming language. Who knows? Maybe they found him in a computer. All right, Neanderthals, the species immediately preceding humans with some crossover. So 400,000 to 40,000 years ago, Europe and West Asia. So we're talking, what we call nowadays Spain, Italy, France, Turkey, Iraq. Oh yeah, that's even up there. So that this is based on skulls that they found in Iraq. They were able to do computer models and say this is what a Neanderthal would have looked like. So they still have the really big brow ridge that humans usually don't, a really big nose that some humans actually do have, a sloping forehead that you wouldn't normally see in a human because their skull is more kind of depressed back, still kind of how apes are. Stocky build, that's not like massively important. They were larger than us, yet we still managed to kill them all. We were smarter. Actually, they think it was global warming. They think they lived in really cold areas and were really well adapted for that. But as the ice ages were ending, that their habitat started to fade, and humans were like, hey, look, it's warmer. We can leave Africa, right? And we just took over. Obviously, we probably killed some of them, but it wasn't. They think it probably wasn't a genocide.
Another hypothesis is that the Homo sapiens were actually way more violent than Neanderthals.
Oh, we definitely are. Have you seen the stuff we do? Yeah. So they think that Neanderthals probably didn't fight as often. They probably didn't even want to, and humans showed up like we always do. And we were like, we're going to kill you anyway and take all your stuff. Good stuff, man. Bigger brain, bigger douche.
So if we have the ability to adapt, why is everybody worried about global warming?
If we have the ability to adapt?
Yeah.
No. Global warming happened to be in our favor at that time because it went from ice age to normal weather. Now we're going from normal weather to we're going to run out of atmosphere. We're not going to adapt to that. We're going to run out of oxygen, and we're all going to die. Or all the ice caps are going to melt. Earth's going to flood. We can't swim for our entire lives. Well, you can. It's just going to be, your entire life's going to be about 20 minutes. So you can swim for the rest of your life. So no, global warming's very bad. In this case, it happened to work out pretty good because it killed them and it gave us a habitat we liked. But now we're killing the planet. So if you don't believe me, look up ice shelves are cracking in Antarctica that have not cracked in like 500 million years. So yeah, we gotta change some stuff. But that's a sidebar about why Homo sapiens are not the best Homo species. It was probably the Neanderthals. They just looked like they would have been nice guys. You know, you could have sat down and had a conversation. So, just some important features to note from their skull shape is what's called the occipital bun. So really Neanderthals started the man bun, but it was built in, right? Their head literally was pointed into a bun, and that was just part of how their brain fit into the skull and how their foramen magnum. It's pretty much flat, right? But it kind of curls back like that, whereas humans, it's basically flat, right? And then the jawline, right? It has a more protruding, thicker set jaw, more ape-like, if you want to think of it that way. Definitely pretty darn close to human, because again, they were immediately preceding us. But there are, especially that occipital bun, that's a dead giveaway. Whenever they find a skull with an occipital bun, it's pretty much because they were a Neanderthal, unless there was like some massive birth defect.
Their occipital buns, like from all the species leading up.
Yeah, they pretty much all have it, and it faded over time, and eventually we got the nice round curly skull. Other questions?
So in Homo erectus, it looks like the occipital bun isn't as pronounced as Neanderthals. Is that?
Yeah, I have no idea. Probably just the picture, because it's still there. This is still an occipital bun. Maybe it's just not as pronounced. I wouldn't expect him to ask you like which Homo species had the biggest occipital bun. More than anything, I would know in particular that Neanderthals had them. That's kind of one of the ways that they're able to tell our skulls apart, but pretty much everybody above him also has it. This part right here saying facial retraction and neurocranial globularity is a really fancy way of saying we have flat faces, right? Which is paramorphosis or pedomorphosis? A couple people said pedomorphosis. You're right, because it's a juvenile trait, right? Most apes are born with a round head and a flat face. They eventually grow out of it because for that animal, like a gorilla, having a really big, strong jaw is advantageous because they fight each other and things like that. They kill animals. Humans, we maintain the flat skull. We have a pretty weak jaw compared to like most animals, right? And so it's just still juvenilized, so pedomorphosis.
So do we think that Neanderthals, like, their juvenile
I don't know. I would guess yes, because even chimpanzees have round skulls as babies. So I would be surprised if Neanderthals didn't, because obviously Neanderthals evolved after chimpanzees. So I would guess, yeah, they would have that, but I don't know. I would be blown away if he asked you whether or not Neanderthals had baby faces when they were babies. But I say that because, well, actually, no, he's not going to ask that. I won't even scare you guys with that one. There's no way he would ask that because I don't know it. So if I don't know it, nobody knows it. Okay, again, more just to point out some differences. The big brow ridge, really large eye sockets, a very big nose. The mid face is essentially like the upper lip area, right? Sticks out pretty far, and their skull, their jawbone is out really far, and the back of their skull extends pretty far back into that occipital bun, as compared to humans, right? All of it's pretty rounded out, a lot more diminutive. Again, just all very juvenilized in comparison to other Homo species, right? It's not juvenile in an adult human because they're adults. But whenever we talk about like juvenilized, it's usually relative to something else. Like the axolotl. You guys remember how it's stuck in a permanent juvenile state? It's not really a juvenile state because it's an adult, but relative to other species, it looks juvenile, right? I do a lot of air quotes, and then I realize people on Panopto can't see what I'm doing. Just the tone of my voice should tell you that I'm doing air quotes. Couple of, I guess we already mentioned this a little bit, but a couple of important theories on how Homo sapiens took over as Neanderthals went out. So there's the multi-regional theory saying that Homo sapiens dispersed throughout the old world and just took their genes into the world, right? So they started in sub-Saharan Africa and moved up and out and through and probably mixed with Neanderthals, and just eventually there were more humans than Neanderthals. Or there's the replacement theory, right? So a single group evolved to be the anatomically modern human, right? So I guess I should clarify this better. They came out of Africa, but as they came out of Africa, there were other humans also evolving at the same time. So therefore, multi-regional, right? So from a few regions, they moved throughout the world and spread their genes, right? The replacement model says they came straight from one big group of Homo sapiens in sub-Saharan Africa, moved all the way up through, right? And part of that was global warming. The Sahara Desert used to be completely uninhabitable. It's still pretty bad, but there was no way for humans to get through until the planet warmed up a little bit. They got through the Sahara and they went throughout the whole world. They all started in one spot and replaced everybody else. So multi-regional, they started in multiple regions. Replacement, they all came out of the same spot and replaced everybody else. The current consensus is the leaky replacement model. Do you guys remember what that is?
Yeah, like basically replacement, but then kind of Neanderthals just like leaked in their DNA.
Yeah, so it wasn't a perfect, like, we came straight out of Africa or we came from a couple spots and just took over, right? There was some crossbreeding between humans and Neanderthals, and it didn't just kind of like in one big fell swoop we took over the planet, right? There was mixing, and there was probably gaps where we didn't fight with the Neanderthals or whatever may have gotten rid of them, but it was just a slower, more imperfect process, which is the current consensus because it just makes more sense, right? That we have Neanderthal DNA, so we know for a fact that we crossed with them. But there's plenty of evidences behind showing that it was a slower, more imperfect movement. Make sense? So definitely know those three. Again, it's just started from multiple areas and took over the world, came straight out of South Africa, Southern Africa, and took over the world, or kind of a little bit of all of it. That's all my slides. You guys have any questions, any concerns? Anything you want to talk about before you go? Guys getting stoked for exam 4?
So the abundant gene flow in the multi-region model, it's talking about like gene flow between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals?
And between themselves, just because there were pockets. So like in Europe there were a few, and in Asia there were a few, and in Africa there were a few, and as they met, they shared genes. But also they met with Neanderthals and shared genes. So, and that happened, they think, in the multi-regional model and in the leaky replacement model. The difference being that in the multi-regional model, it's still, the idea was basically we crossbred with Neanderthals, but at the same time we just killed them all. The leaky replacement says it was more of a slow process.
Didn't you say that the multi-regional model is like the old view or the old model, and then the replacement is the new one,
Yeah.
and then the weaker replacement is the correct?
Yeah, so they said multi-regional first, and then they said, that's probably not, that doesn't make a lot of sense. We'll do the replacement model. But then they said, well, that doesn't really work perfectly either, so now they've gotten to the leaky replacement model. Yeah, so they're basically in order that way. Other questions? All right, get out of here. Whoever's got the roll, if you could bring it up, please.